it was a frustration. Believe me, the president of the label, Bernie DiMatteo, and my A&R guy, Jeff Burns, who signed so many huge acts, they were very frustrated, because it was difficult to kind of cross that border.
An all-new episode of The Jeremy White Show.
Available wherever you stream.
Talking about the live show, Styx going to be heading off to Vegas, the Venetian Theatre inside the Venetian Resort Vegas, doing shows January 26th, 27th, 31st, February 2nd, and 3rd. Tickets are on sale now at Ticketmaster.com. You want to go check that out. Talking about that, though, it's like, how, especially in 2023, it's like, and we're talking about radio. How important was radio to you and your career coming up in the 80s?
Well, essential. As essential as the kind of as what your show is today. How this is how we connect with people now on a global level. Really, everyone can watch this. But radio was, you had to go region by region, and if you wanted to tour the country, if you wanted to cross Canada, you better have radio support in every major market. Otherwise, you're going to have to miss that place.
Right.
Because radio was the way people found out about your stuff. That, and of course, once the cable system was really, coast to coast, video was this hand in hand connection between video and radio to really get your songs out there, and so it was essential.
Yeah. It's funny, Mitch and I were talking just the other night. We were talking about Bryan Adams because he put out this like box set of he did like 3 albums at the Royal Albert Hall in the UK, and we're like, man, it's amazing how like huge Bryan became through the 80s and around the world. But then you look at other Canadian artists, like the Honeymoon Suites and or even your solo stuff. It's like you never really branched out outside of Canada, and I always wondered why was that? Was that like record labels holding you back or?
Well, yeah, and yes, it was. In fact, here's the way the paradigm was. This is why I'm so reluctant to give advice to young musicians who say, "Well, how do you get it there?" The latter was a completely different setup back then. If you got signed to one of the 4 major labels, Columbia, Capitol, EMI, A&M, which is the biggest independent, or Warner Brothers, Atlantic, Warner Electra Atlantic. If you were signed to one of those labels, you had basically a great support system behind you. However, they controlled the market, and this is going to be really boring, Jeremy, but I'll try.
No, I love this. Please tell the story.
By controlling the market, this is how you can build, great empires as they had. They were monolithic, gigantic companies who were the gatekeepers, basically, of music around the world. Well, one of the things you learn is you don't flood the market entirely with too many choices for people. That's why the internet is, there was a saying I heard just a few years back. It's become old now, but it used to be that 1,000 bands in the world sold 1 million records each. And now there's 1 million bands that sell about 1,000 albums each, and that's an old saying at this point, but it's really true that the internet completely wiped that method of them selling away. And then they spent years trying to retool and refocus how they should operate, and they've managed to do that. For example, that as they did around roughly 2014, 15. With Styx, that's when we went back to Universal, who had the whole catalog and everything, because the company had become much more, had streamlined itself and made itself much more relevant to the current reality of what the internet did to the old, as I say, to the old setup.
Right.
So with some artists, because the way their deals were structured, would get exposure in other markets. And I'm very good friends with Jim Valance, who is the co-writer with Bryan.
All that Bryan stuff, yeah.
All the songs. And we were discussing that last year. I was doing Jim's. I did a speech to kind of his inauguration into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and we were talking about that. And so much of that made the difference was. In the way their deal was set up, the publishing, I think, was held by A&M in the U.S., whereas my publishing was held in Canada by Anthem, who had Rush, which was great, but my deal was a different record deal. I was with Columbia Records, and they just did not wish to kind of give me any sort of push in the United States. Now, we tried. I did an entire national tour with Tears for Fears in 1985 throughout America, when Songs from the Big Chair was number one there, and Strange Animal was number one in a good number of markets in Canada at the same time. And we tried trying that way to tip their hand, but they were very cautious about who they released where and what the trade-off was as well. As I say, it's a long, laborious subject, but that's why music was like that. Now, what I love today, quite frankly, is how many people over the last, since the internet, and particularly since me joining Styx, how many of them in America here, where I am right now playing with Styx tonight, how many of them have discovered those records, and especially in light of the fact that 80s music has become so popular among people who weren't even born in the 80s. They seem to be the ones that champion Strange Animal and Great Dirty World, and my first album even, and Lost Brotherhood. Those 80s albums that I made are part of their life, and it's fantastic to see that. So when I come to play these shows in Quebec, there will be younger people there that weren't even born that will know every lyric, just as there will be tonight when I play with Styx here in Indiana. And so eventually, no matter what the business setup is in the background, the music will find its way through to some degree at some point, if it's got a quality to it that resonates with people. Yeah.
And that's the interesting about the internet. It's like Bill Maher did this whole segment not long ago talking about how streaming kind of like ruined things for artists and stuff. But he's like, no, I think streaming actually kind of cut out the middleman and said, you're either successful or you're not, because there's no reason for you not to be, because everybody has access to find you.
He has some very astute observations, and that's definitely one of them, is that, it's like if I go on YouTube and I just, look up videos and stuff, there's a song on Great Dirty World called Dedication that I never did a video for. It was never a single. We discussed it being a single at the time, and there was all kinds of, and I see, there's a video of it made by someone I think it was in Brazil, and it's completely got a Portuguese translation to it all the way through, and tens of thousands of views, and I'm trying to translate the comments, etc., because they found it themselves and the song connected with them. And that's the beauty of music, is there's no real containing music into one time period. You might suddenly find yourself connected to a piece that Mozart wrote, 300 years ago for some reason. And the internet gives you instant access to that. That's the other beautiful thing of it, is that if someone hears the name Gowan, or comes by this interview with Jeremy White for a moment and goes, oh, what's this guy like? Boom. It's not, they don't have to wait. They've got that split second thing to go, Gowan, oh, there's the song. Oh, Moonlight Desires. Oh yeah, I kind of like that, or no, next.
Well, that's it.
The other.
It's like instant gratification. Yeah, I think Bill Maher's line was like, he's like, everybody, all these songwriters and independent artists are complaining that, only the top 1% are getting all the revenue. And he's like, well, yeah, we call those the successful ones.
Well, yeah.
we call those the good ones.
That's a little bit harsh. That's
I thought it was a funny line.
Exactly. Well, remember, at his core, I think he's a comedian.
Yeah, well, he is, yeah. But it's interesting you talk about how, like the labels were kind of holding you back in certain territories. It's almost like you were being sandboxed into being, like a CanCon artist, and they don't want to put you anywhere else because, you have to be CanCon and that's it.
Well, there's more. That's again, and in one quick stroke, that's kind of what it was. But they did this They did this for reasons of business that just worked for them. Okay. They were promoting one artist in one area and doing really, really well with it. It made more sense to continue with that artist than to take, and there'd have to be a trade-off. In Columbia Records, there's a wonderful trade-off with Britain, with so many artists. Bruce Springsteen was still, when he was gigantic here, he was still kind of coming up a bit in England. When George Michael, Wham, for example, these are people that were on the same label as, when they were doing extremely well and playing Wembley or whatever in England, they were kind of getting a little bit of play in America. Well, they could trade those two off and go, you promote it, right? Canada didn't have as much weight when it came to kind of trying to play that kind of power game. You take this artist, we take them, unless you were signed directly to that American label. And wow. I signed with Columbia Records in Canada, and it was a frustration. Believe me, the president of the label, Bernie DiMatteo, and my A&R guy, Jeff Burns, who signed so many huge acts, they were very frustrated, because it was difficult to kind of cross that border. But hey, things worked out.
Yeah, they did. And it's funny because back when I was on like Top 40 radio in Montreal, I'm still on in Toronto and stuff, and I don't really do like a lot of their interviews. But when I used to talk to guys like Tyler Shaw and like, Sean Hook and Virginia to Vegas, and, they kill it on Canadian radio, but they're CanCon guys, and they couldn't get arrested in the States. So I asked them that,
It's it's where the music is exposed. It's as simple as that. It's there's nothing more to it at all. There are artists still to this day who are massive, say in Britain or in Germany, and people haven't heard of them or haven't heard of them yet.
That's it. I see people at shows all the time on like Snapchat or Instagram stories, and they're people, playing venues like, in Montreal, like the MTELUS or, the Corona Theater. And I'm like, I have no idea who this person is, but they sold out the Metropolis.
That's right.
Like, what?
Yes.
And it's all kids. It's like hip hop artists or,
Yeah. Well, that's it. You're a victim of that. We're oversaturated on so much, and we really have to be extremely selective. And eventually we find what kind of resonates with our DNA.
An all-new episode of The Jeremy White Show.
Available wherever you stream.